You may have seen footage of the challenges that I've been undertaking over the last 5-6 years for Blood Cancer UK, but you may not know the reasons why I do this. Now, I've put together a collection of clips, and I really want to share with you the stories of some of the friends I've met along this journey since my own diagnosis of blood cancer in 2013. And also at the end, I've included a clip featuring Professor Martin Poole from University College London, and he is pioneering groundbreaking CAR T therapy. This is the sort of thing that the funds that I raise, that you guys donate, helps to keep going, keeps that research going. In the blood cancer community, the thinking is that we will have cures for all blood cancers in a range between 15 to 30 years. That's incredible, and I want to be around when that's done. So take a look. If you feel you can, please donate. You'll have seen where to donate on my posts, and I hope you enjoy. Thanks for watching. Very often the focus is on me, the patient, and the focus is on the physiological treatment of the blood cancer. The diagnosis and the effects of it have a much wider impact. And whilst my therapy isn't perhaps as brutal in immediate term, I do have quite a range of side effects which I have to live with and deal with every single day. And that really affects you emotionally and mentally. If you dwell on that then tends to trigger some of the lows, because there is this, I don't see an end to it. Thankfully, I found coping mechanisms and support from Bloodwise, point me in the right direction of how, where I can go if I need to. There is no bottomless pit of funding, from the NHS, and again, mental health very often takes the back seat. There's two parts to a cancer diagnosis. There's the physiological, the cancer itself, but then there's the mental aspect that needs looking at as well.
My name's Anne Bromley, and this is the reason I'm doing the Bloodwise London to Paris bike ride. My cancer diagnosis first came about, this is in 2002 when I presented with some symptoms. So I went to the doctors and they sent me for various tests, but it wasn't for 6 months until I got a diagnosis of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It was really important to have family support. If I didn't have that family, I don't think I could have got through everything.
When Mum was diagnosed, so we were about, I think I was 15 or 16 and my sister was 13 or 14. It was a really difficult time. And I think what made it really difficult was it took a long time for her to get diagnosed, because she was told at one moment that she might have cancer, then she was told that she didn't, and then she was told that she did. So it was kind of backwards and forwards, so it was a real kind of wave of emotions. But I mean, our family is a real kind of unit, and we're really strong, and we got through it together.
It was a very long journey that I had ahead of me. I was given the process, what chemotherapy I would be going through, and radiotherapy, and possible side effects. So you just hope that it's not going to be as bad as maybe you think it will be. But it was, and it was worse. I don't like to say that, but it was very, very hard. You can't give up. I'd tempted so many times, thinking I can't go through this. It's horrendous. It really is dreadful, treatments. Sorry, I just need to have a moment. But I can't believe where I am. I can't believe it. Everyone had written me off.
Really?
They'd all written me off.
She was given the all clear a few times and then it came back, and then she was given the all clear and then it came back. So again, a real roller coaster. But when she'd had, I think it was a year of rituximab, a drug to keep the cancer away, and it didn't come back after that, you know, kind of as we move further and further away from Mum being in remission, it was just wonderful. And now, you know, we're 10 years since Mum received treatment, and she's you know, just a wonderful person, has done so many incredible things over those 10 years.
I wanted to raise as much money as possible for Bloodwise because their life-saving research helped save my life. So if I can do some small token gesture, like a bike ride to Paris, that's great.
Myself and my dad and my sister, we will all be there at the finishing line. This is Mum's year. This is the year that, you know, after 10 years of being in remission, you know, what a wonderful way to celebrate.
I'll be so proud to be riding for Bloodwise and with 200 other like-minded people, all with one focus in their mind, and that's to raise awareness and raise money for Bloodwise.
I heard those words that they suspected that it was leukemia, and the tears came, and I was trying to stop them, and I kept apologising, and she was very lovely and said that, you know, we can do this. And I think in that situation your very first thought is that you're going to lose your child. We're 2 years into our journey now, and I still have moments where it comes over me, and I think I still cannot believe that my son has leukemia, because you never think it's going to be you. You never think that will be your family. And the diagnosis affected the whole family. Obviously Hugo bears the brunt of the physical side of it, but I think for the rest of us the mental side has been quite difficult. You try not to let it affect your whole life, because it's a 3-year treatment plan. You can't spend every day worrying or let it affect your whole life. But on the other hand, that worry and that fear of the unknown, of what might happen, it's there all the time. It's really difficult for Hugo's older brother to fully understand quite how poorly his brother is, but it also makes it difficult for him to understand why there's so much attention and focus on Hugo. The steroids that he takes as part of his treatment have caused the muscles in his legs to weaken. They've now weakened to such an extent that Hugo can't walk at the moment. After having to sort of dealt with the blow of leukemia, it now feels almost like we're having to get our heads round having a disabled child. So our life is having to sort of adapt all over again. The donations go to research that has and continues to make a difference. The idea that in years to come that not only will we be able to cure children with leukemia, but in a kinder way as well, so that children aren't having to live potentially with lifelong side effects, that children aren't having to spend months in a wheelchair. That would just be amazing.
For a long time, our approach to treating blood cancer has essentially been a refinement of different versions of chemotherapy, whereas we saw this year some brand new treatments come into the NHS like CAR-T for the first time in blood cancer. So these sessions are really important because staying on top of that is critical. And when I said it challenged the organisation, it challenges us because not only do we need to think about the research that will get quickly to beat blood cancer, because all the scientists I talk to say the day when we will beat blood cancer is within our sight. Some people say it's 30 years, some people say it's 20. The earliest I've ever heard is 15 years until nobody dies of their blood cancer. I mean, that's extraordinary, isn't it? For an organisation that's 60 years old, we are looking ahead to a future which is much shorter than our history, which puts a real energy into the organisation to say, well, let's fund the stuff that is definitely going to accelerate that day forward. We've had, I've mentioned it, then Bella mentioned it, CAR-T is something that has been in the news a huge amount, and it's something that everyone is very, very excited about as being potentially something really genuinely groundbreaking and a totally new approach. Oh, do you want to you go and ask
You
him
keep
to the
on
side?
talking while I plug in.
So we are joined today by Dr. Martin Pule, who is hopefully an IT expert as well as an expert on CAR-T.
No.
We're asking everyone to multitask, which is great. Now, some of you, how many of you saw War in the Blood, the documentary I mean, absolutely phenomenal. If you haven't seen it, then I really would say it's a very moving piece of television, and it features Martin pretty heavily looking at how this new breakthrough treatment really does impact currently on patients. And although it's an area where we've got huge hopes, the reality, as Martin's going to talk about, isn't up to its expectation yet. So really what we asked Martin to talk to you about is what is the future for CAR-T and how much hope should we be putting on it? Because you hear people talk about it as a game changer, never mind curing blood cancers, might cure all cancers. So we're hoping that Martin will put that in, maybe make us more excited about it, but also put it in some perspective and also give you a chance to ask any questions that you might have of him about how it all works or anything you want. Martin, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. I've done this a few times over the years, so I hope any of you have heard the talk before won't be too boring. I like to show this slide because it just reminds everybody how old chemotherapy is. A lot of the chemotherapy that we use still today for leukemia and lymphoma literally came from the trenches. So nitrogen mustard type of drugs like melphalan and cyclophosphamide, some of these drugs some of you may have had, actually came from the trenches or from observations of mustard gas made people's white blood cells disappear. So that's how old that is. And the first targeted therapy, you might have heard a lot about targeted therapy, came from Sidney Farber, who saw that children with leukemia, their blood counts dropped, so he tried to give them folic acid to try and make their blood counts go up again. And instead of that happening, the leukemia took off. So he made something that blocked folic acid called methotrexate, which is a drug that some of you may also have had. So it's interesting how old all these ideas of chemotherapy are, and it's always worth bearing that in mind. The slightly frustrating thing is that if you look under a microscope, as an intelligent, entity, and you look under the microscope, and you look at a section of tissue, and it's actually very easy to see what's normal and what's abnormal. So this is really what cancer treatment is about. It's about discriminating between something that is abnormal and something that is normal. And the abnormal thing is a cell that's gone wrong from our own body, so it's not really that different from a normal cell. But actually, if you look down the microscope, you can usually pretty easily figure out when something is abnormal and when something it isn't. And it's almost think what you could do if you had something intelligent, I mean, not really very intelligent, but modestly intelligent, coming along and sort of checking all these cells. And rather than trying to silt up a whole lot of cogwheels inside these cells by kind of putting something through the whole body, if you actually had something to move around and actually look to see and to kind of feel and to try and figure out whether something is normal or abnormal, then you might think that that would be a much better way of doing it, and that might give you much better selectivity for an abnormal cell rather than an abnormal cell, all right? So, maybe an intelligence is probably too far-fetched, but let's settle for a small robot. How about that? Like a very small robot. Like that old film from the 1950s, where you can kind of sail into the body in a little submarine, and, so if you can imagine. But the thing is, actually, there is such a thing. Nature has created such a thing, and it's called an immune cell or a T cell. So this is a T cell. So it's a T cell is part of our immune system, and it's probably one of the key parts of our immune system. And its job is to move around the body like a little robot, looking at cells and looking to see if there's anything wrong with them. In particular, it's looking to see if these cells are infected with something, particularly a virus, and it's looking for what we call non-self, which is a fancy way for saying that hasn't come from the body, it's come from a virus or a bacteria or something like that. And when it sees a cell that has something that is non-self on it or from a virus, it gets very excited and it kills it. It kills the target cell. But it does much more than that, actually. It makes copies of itself when it gets excited. It recruits other more simple parts of the immune system to come in and do other things. And then when all the excitement is over, it doesn't just go away. It sort of switches itself into a kind of a semi-sleeping state where it's still moving around looking for things, but not particularly active. And we call that immunological memory. So, all of us have these things moving around our body, billions of them. And they're called T cells. And they're not interested really so much in cancer cells, particularly not in blood cancer cells. And the reason for that is very simple, that blood cancer cells, have come from normal cells. They're not infected with a virus or a bacteria. And when a T cell meets them, it kind of says, oh, it's just another normal cell in our body. All right, so that's really the problem. And the main question then is, can we convince these cells to fight cancers? What if, however, we could put onto the T cells an artificial sensor, an artificial receptor that could then make them recognize the tumor antigen? Okay, they've still got their flu and their cold virus and their measles virus receptor. We don't have to worry about those. But now they've got a new receptor that sees the tumor antigen, and now they recognize the tumor and they will kill it. So that would be something that would be really very useful to achieve, and that's what a chimeric antigen receptor is. Okay. So this is really the heart. So you kind of really know everything there is to know now about chimeric antigen receptor therapy, really. Okay, so we have these cells called T cells, and actually they're plentiful in our blood. So you can take them out from a blood sample, or if you want to get more of them, you can do something called a leukapheresis, which some of you may have had done for harvesting for an autograft. A leukapheresis is just a way of getting, rather than sort of taking 3 pints of blood from somebody, you kind of take 3 pints of blood from somebody but give the red cells back so they don't sort of drop down dead when they stand up. So we can isolate lots of T cells from blood, and then we put a virus that's come from HIV but doesn't replicate, but has our gene there, and now these T cells are now engineered so that they now permanently express a chimeric antigen receptor. And then we grow them for a bit. Usually we freeze them, and then we give them to the patient in a drip, pretty much in the same way that you would give a stem cell transplant or a bone marrow transplant, just as a drip. This is Sisyphus, who had to take a stone and roll it up a hill, and then it would roll back down and do it again. And I put this here because actually doing an experiment in the lab or doing it in a mouse is actually relatively easy, but doing a clinical study is extremely expensive and extremely laborious and time-consuming because your manufacturing obviously has to be clean. You have to have made sure that what you're doing is reasonably safe and is worth the risk in patients. And then you have to keep the ethics committee and the MHRA, to pass through their approval process. So it is really a very, very tricky thing. And I mean, this is kind of a real story. This is one of the patients who's the furthest out, Austin. So this is Persis Amrolia's patient who, I'm on the adult side in UCL. And the nice thing about CAR T cell treatment is actually that, once you're over the initial storm of inflammation, actually you don't really get long-term side effects from it, unlike bone marrow transplantation or chemotherapy. So you can get quite sick during the treatment, sort of everything from a flu-like illness to much more severe inflammation. But once you get over it, that generally speaking is it. So these are the areas where we're working on in UCL. So diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, and it's a particular thanks actually to Bloodwise for funding the COBALT study, which was our first study and allowed us to actually get off the ground with this in UCL. So it wasn't for Bloodwise, all the others wouldn't happen. Well, a T cell is a very, very complicated machine. It's still microscopic, but compared to a small molecule or a protein, it's huge. It's a huge, complicated machine with its own little computer program running. So the amount of engineering that you can do to these cells is huge. You can get them to recognize not just one target but a pattern of targets. You can get them to move to certain places. You can get them to divide when you want them to divide, to secrete certain payloads when you want them to secrete certain payloads. So a huge amount of freedom in what you can engineer. So that's why I think this technology will eventually just take over everything else, just because of the amount of complexity you can put into it.